Hey there, friends. Welcome to Susie Larson Live. So glad to have you join us tonight. And I have a very important question for you. And here it is. Do you believe that God wants to use you in ways that are totally disproportionate to who you are? Do you believe that nothing can hinder the process and the promises of God over your life, like your past, your critics, even your worst mistakes? You can hinder your call because you can choose unbelief. You can choose not to believe God and cooperate with Him, but nothing else can stand in the way. If you trust God, anything is possible. Well, we have an important show for you tonight. And if you've read any of my books, heard me speak, you know I'm so passionate about purpose and calling, and that each of us as Christ followers dares to believe God for the impossible, dares to follow Him on the adventure of faith. Because when we are walking out the plan that He has for us, the world changes. I mean, the kingdom comes, and it's absolutely amazing thing to see each of us step into a place of faith where God is using our passion, our talent, and then you mix in the impossible God and His promises, and this is the stuff of miracles. Well, we have one such story today, and I'm talking to Ben Malcomson, and he is assistant to Coach Pete Carroll for the Seattle Seahawks. His book is titled Walk On. I read a lot of books. I loved this book. I'm a major football fan for one thing, but I'm so passionate about this idea of calling. And that combination, this book is great. We've got 5 copies. I'll tell you how we can get those into your hands in just a little bit. But I want to give him a proper introduction where we get this conversation started. Ben Malcomson is the Director of External Relations and Assistant to Seattle Seahawks head coach Pete Carroll. He's contributed to a range of media outlets, including the Associated Press, USA Today, Sports Illustrated, and he resides in Seattle with his family. And friends, I want to know where you're watching from. I know we've got people who are viewing from all over the world. But Ben, welcome to the program. So good to have you.
Thanks, Susie. It's so good to be with you and all the people watching in live. It's going to be a good hour here. I'm excited.
I indeed agree. And again, I love your story so much, and can't wait for our friends to hear your story. You open this book right away. You hit the ground running with a scene at the sidelines of a Super Bowl game. Can you bring us to that point in your story?
Yeah, well, a couple years ago, being an assistant to Coach Pete Carroll there at the Seahawks, a couple years ago, we were in the Super Bowl. We were actually in back-to-back Super Bowls there with the Seahawks. The first one we won 43-8 against the Denver Broncos. The next year we're back in the Super Bowl, trying to win it again back-to-back years, and we're playing the New England Patriots. Now, most people that watch football will remember this game and the play that happened at the very end where our quarterback stepped back to throw the game-winning touchdown, and lo and behold, the Patriots, in some shocking play, pick it off for the interception, and the Patriots win the game in the last seconds of the game. And we were 1 yard away from winning our second straight Super Bowl. So you can imagine the heartbreak, the gut-wrenching feeling that was for all of the people that worked for the team, all of our players, but then our fans too. It was crushing. It hurt a lot. And we're still talking about it today. Here we are 3 or 4 years later. It's a play that will live on forever. And so I take the readers in my first introductory chapter of the book. I take them into the locker room that afternoon, right after the game, what happened that night. And I mean, just in seconds there from the time that the play happens, and then just minutes later, we're sitting in the locker room, and I'm thinking to myself, what possibly could Coach Carroll, our head coach, say to the team to fix this situation, to make everyone feel better? Because this was painful to go through such a loss. And he sits there in the locker room, and he gathers everyone around him, and he says, if you're going to blame anyone, you blame me. I'm sorry, guys. And it was just an incredible example of leadership, something that I'll never forget the rest of my life, just how the buck truly stopped with him. He wasn't the one that threw the pass or ran the route. He didn't call the play, but because he was the leader, because he was the guy in charge, he took full responsibility. And that was an incredible example of leadership that I'll remember forever.
In the way you described it, you're on the sidelines and you're someone who helps coach with his speeches. So in your head, you're writing about this back-to-back, game-changing play that surely you're going to win this game. And you've got the bullet points in your mind that you're going to hand coach this speech about the victory. And then the victory escapes you and you get into the locker room, and there are some players who are punching the lockers, others are crying, and, just because everybody had worked so hard. And then you see the coach, make a speech like that, and the temperature basically changed in the locker room, didn't it?
Oh, 100%. I mean, it went from pain and grief and heartache to the air was released because he, in a sense, laid on the grenade, this painful grenade that we were all dealing with. He, as a leader, took it upon himself and said, I'll take all the blame. I'll take all the responsibility. And it changed the complexion of how we moved on from it, and it changed the way that we all dealt with it, because he gave us a beautiful example of how to deal with pain and how to deal with just excruciating heartbreak. And I know it's just sports, and I know that it's just a game, but it's these guys' livelihoods, and it's these guys, the way they're remembered, and all sorts of things. So it's more than just a game for some of these guys, for most of the guys. So
Well, I think, I'm sorry, I was going to say, I think people can trivialize it saying it's just a game, but what if that happened in the marketplace? If, let's say, you work on Wall Street, you have a major loss. Anybody feels a major loss when you put your heart into the thing that you're called to do, right?
Exactly. And you spend hours and hours and years of your life, and you go to school for it, and you work in the off season. I mean, you just put your heart and soul into it, and you make all these sacrifices around your friendships, your family, everything that's going on. And you get that close to winning a second straight Super Bowl, and it gets ripped from your hands 1 yard away.
Man, one of the media outlets, I think, said worst play called in history or something like that. How did the team, once the coach basically fell on the grenade, how did you guys process as a team some of the external pressure? People, because of what the coach did the team members kind of hunker together and kind of present a united front after that?
Yeah, it was amazing how unifying it was. I mean, definitely there were some people that lashed out and that were still dealing with the grief and the pain in their own ways. But for the most part, it really brought our guys together, and it allowed them to really face the pain head on and face it together. And when we face things together, especially painful things, it's almost like we get this boost, we're almost unstoppable when we're together, when we're arms linked, facing a challenging situation together. It's really powerful.
Yes, I'm so intrigued by good leadership, by humble, strong, courageous leadership. It's amazing what a group of people can accomplish when they're led by someone like that. So absolutely amazing. And your story getting there is just so fascinating to me. So let's go back to the young Ben, because this wasn't the first time you had highs and lows and ups and downs. So give us a glimpse of what the little guy, little kid, Ben, what was life like for you as a child?
Well, I grew up when I was 10 years old. My dad made me play football, Pop Warner, Pee Wee football there in our little suburban town. And I was just like every other kid, just trying to figure out what sport I wanted to play. And I played every sport growing up. And that 1 year of playing football, I was miserable. I hated it, and couldn't wait to finish playing that season. I actually wanted to quit halfway through the season, but my dad wouldn't let me. He said, if you start something, you're not going to quit it. You're going to finish it. And so he said, when the season's over, we can reevaluate, but you're not going to quit during the season. And I'm so glad he taught me that lesson, because I wanted to quit so many times. And I'm just so glad he encouraged me and nudged me along. And in some ways, it was kind of that fatherly pillar, and just really pushed me to keep going and finish that season. But then right when that season ended, I promptly quit. I said I was never going to football ever again.
Okay, so you're a small guy. You're getting smashed into all the time. So the mamas around here like, let him quit. I mean, you're getting creamed. But you said you really attribute that call from your dad. You drew from that in years to come, didn't you?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, definitely there were times when it might have been safer, quote unquote, for me to quit, because I was way undersized. I was a late bloomer, and I did not belong on the football field in pads and a helmet and all that. Especially at that age, it was tough. But I think the life lessons and the character that my dad kind of poured into me in that moment was unmatched by anything. Any other decision I could have made. I mean, I was so glad, because that paid off down the road. I'm sure we'll get there as we continue to tell this story. But I mean, just that don't quit attitude, I think that really paid off in big ways.
Mm-hmm. And so you, as a child, make kind of an inner vow, never doing football again. And just friends, he works for the NFL. But anyway, it's amazing. So did you have dreams back then? Did you have dreams of what you wanted to do?
Oh, I was kind of wishy-washy. I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I was a big-time runner when I was in high school. I ran cross-country and track and really enjoyed that, and found a lot of success in that. But I was still trying to figure out what my career was going to be when I was done. Thankfully, I had some really good teachers and just really good people in my life that showed me how to write really well when I was younger, and when I was junior high and high school and into college. Just some great instructors that showed me how to write. And through that time, my dad kind of instilled in me this love for the sports section of the newspaper. That was back in the day when everyone got their newspaper delivered on their front doorstep. It's changed a little bit these days. Everyone's on their phones reading the newspaper, but I would sit there every morning at the breakfast table, thumbing through the sports section, reading everything that I possibly could. And so those two together, I think my life was definitely moving in that direction towards maybe being a sports writer. And it was something that was really intriguing to me and really exciting.
Okay, here's where the story will blow your mind if you don't know Ben's story. But you're in college and you're a sports editor and you're writing an article about the walk-ons for the top college football team in the nation. And you think, as any reporter would, I'm going undercover. I'm going to try out so I can write an article. I mean, you basically kind of came up with that on your own. Did you tell anybody you were planning on doing that?
Well, I went and talked to our head coach at USC at the time, University of Southern California, Coach Pete Carroll, who's now the Seahawks head coach. I went up and talked to him, and I had covered the team for 3 years at that point. I was a senior in college, and I had covered every home and away game. I'd been to a bunch of Heisman Trophy ceremonies, national championship football games. So I gained some familiarity with Coach Carroll just from being around the team and interviewing him and all that. And I went up and asked him, I was like, hey, do you mind if I go through the walk-on tryouts kind of as a joke to write this article for the school newspaper? And he kind of laughed and he's like, well, I mean, it's not going to be very interesting, but go for it if you want. And so he was one of the few people I told. I didn't really tell many of my friends. And it was kind of a joke. And I was kind of embarrassed too. Like, what am I doing trying out for the best football team in the country?
Okay, so you've got all these players, I think 70 something, who at least showed up for the meeting, who are going to walk on and try out. And as you said, this is kind of life dreams for many of them. You're hoping to stay under the radar, but none of them know that you're doing this to write an article, that you're just showing up as a walk-on as well. And if you remember, friends, he hadn't played football since, I think, 5th grade when you vowed never to play again. So then you go and you try out. I'm awestruck by that. So take us to the tryout day, what that was like for you.
Oh, well, I mean, I was a fish out of water there. You know, I hadn't played football in more than 10 years. I had watched a lot of football, but it's far different watching than playing. So there I am. We get put out into drills. We get put out into stretching, all this kind of stuff that I had never really done before. And we go run a 40-yard dash. I'd never run a 40-yard dash in my life. You know, it's like, what's the sprinter stance look like? All these things that were so foreign to me that for everyone else there, all the other guys that were there actually trying to make the team, these were all old hat. You know, this was just simple, everyday football stuff for them. But for me, everything was brand new. I didn't know what position to try out for. So I put wide receiver ? on the sheet, because it's like, I guess wide receiver? I don't know. You know?
Are you asking or telling me? Yeah. Okay. And for the record, though, because if you were a runner, you know, and I'm all over the place here, but you had a coach who recognized you were the newspaper boy right before you're about to run the dash, right? So they're like, hey, the newspaper boy's here. So they're mocking you, but you are a fast runner and you kill it on the sprints, right? And then you go to do some wide receiving and you catch the ball. So you have some agility, even though you felt like you were a fish out of water. So you had to have been glad about that, right?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think I probably had some divine inspiration that day.
Yeah.
Definitely spurred along by something special, because all these things were brand new to me, and it was I was like a kid, you know. I was just out there just enjoying it, and really I had no pressure because I wasn't trying to make the team. I was just there to write an article, so it really didn't matter. And so maybe that helped too, that I could kind of go out with zero pressure and just kind of let loose.
And didn't you say that Clay Matthews was in that group of walk-ons?
Well, he was.
Did I read that?
Yeah, no. He had made the team a year before.
Oh, got it.
And then he goes on to earn a scholarship eventually at USC, and he's had an incredible career in the NFL, NFL MVP, and all sorts of awards. So
amazing. So anyway, okay, here we are. And I'm going to actually pause here for you if you just hopped on. I'm talking to Ben Malcomson. He's assistant to Pete Carroll, the Seattle Seahawks. Ben has an amazing book. It's titled Walk On, From Pee Wee Dropout to the NFL Sidelines, My Unlikely Story of Football, Purpose, and Following an Amazing God. And what you'll love about this is, he writes like he speaks. This is an amazing story, but there's all these exhortations for you going through the book. If you've hit roadblocks, if you've lost heart, if you've kind of hit a twist and turn in your story where you just feel like there's no hope for me, you'll find hope in this book. It's so amazing. Great scripture, just great encouragement. We've got 5 copies to give away, and this is how we're going to do it. at any point through the broadcast or even after, I'll give you about a day or two after the broadcast, hop on my website, susielarson.com. In the left corner, there's a menu drop down. Find the contact page and reference Ben. Just say interview with Ben or whatever, so I know this is the one you're talking about. And just tell me anything stand out about Ben's story, about our conversation. And then don't forget your mailing address, and we'll draw a handful of names, and you guys will get this in your mailbox, and you'll love it. Okay, so here's Ben, sports editor for the college newspaper, and you decide to try out covertly for the best football team in the nation, college football team, and you go through it because you're a runner and you're able to kind of stay under the radar, so to speak. The next morning, you're out cold and you're sleeping, and then tell us what happened.
I get a phone call from a friend of mine that says, "Hey, Ben, did you try out for the football team?" Now, I hadn't told anyone really other than Coach Carroll and one friend. And so I was like, man, did word get out? Is someone prank calling me? I thought this friend was put up with a prank call. And I was like, yeah, I did. But what, like, why are you calling? And she's like, well, you made the team. And I was like, okay, well, this is definitely a prank call now. I hadn't told anyone. And there is no possible way I could have made the team. I mean, this was the best team in the country. I was a newspaper reporter just trying to write an article. I was 165 pounds. There was no possible way. And it never even crossed my mind it could have even been a possibility. It never even dawned on me that this could happen. And so when she said that, I was like, there's no way. This can't be true. And she's like, no, your name's on the list. And I just hung up the phone. I didn't even say goodbye. And I hustled over to the football building to see this list that she was talking about. And it hits me about halfway there that Coach Carroll is renowned for pulling pranks. I mean, you could go on YouTube right now and type in Pete Carroll prank, and you'll get a dozen pranks will pop up right away. I mean, he's a kid at heart. He's a jokester. He's full of energy. And so it hits me that I'm going to be the butt end of his latest prank. And so I can't believe I fell for this, for the last 2 minutes. And I'm trudging my way up to the football building, just fully expecting him to pull the rug out from under me. And there he is sitting in his office, just bouncing the basketball. And I was like, okay, coach, joke's over. Tell me what's up. He's like, no, you can catch the ball. You can run fast. We want you on the team. And so I was dumbfounded because this was the best college football coach in the country at the time, telling me, who hadn't played football in more than 10 years, that I could actually play football. This was crazy.
Wow. And before we dig into the deeper parts of that story, the prankster piece, you have to tell the story because it's just hilarious to me. But one of the stories you refer to in the book is when a mystery player came to your practice and he was told to go along. Do you mind telling that story?
Yeah, we were at practice one day and we're watching it along, and this mystery player comes in full pads, and coach made a big scene. Oh, he's our new addition to the football team. And it's kind of weird to add a player in the middle of the season, but whatever. Okay, this guy looked big. I guess this would be a nice little addition to the football team. And he goes along and he drops the ball. He didn't look very athletic. And he takes his helmet off, and it's Will Ferrell, the actor who's in all the movies and on Saturday Night Live. We're like, what the heck? How did we fall for this?
Oh my goodness. That life is interesting next to someone who's a prankster like that. I think that's fantastic. Okay, so you're shell-shocked. You're on the team. I mean, there's so many implications to that. I mean, you think about, I can't even imagine what went through your head after that. I mean, thinking about your schedule, your commitments, your physical fitness, the fact that you're going up against guys who are probably twice your size. I mean, what happened next in your brain?
Well, there were a million things going through my brain. First of all, just the logistics of it is, how am I going to make this happen? Because I was a second semester senior, just about a month or so from graduating. And I mean, I don't know how. You have to stay in school. So am I going to get a graduate degree? What am I going to do here? And so figured out that. And then I'm trying to figure out, okay, I get handed a playbook, and that's like trying to learn Japanese. I mean, it is a different language. I didn't know what was going on. It's far different than playing video games on an Xbox. And so I'm like struggling through this. And then I get handed my helmet and pads. And keep in mind, I hadn't played in more than 10 years. So I didn't know how to put pads on. I didn't know how to put a helmet on. All these things were so foreign to me. And it was definitely a rude awakening right from the start. I was in over my head.
How did the teammates treat you?
At first, they were like, wait, you're the guy that interviews us. You're the guy that covers us for the newspaper. And but word spread pretty quickly. And Coach Carroll does an incredible job of creating a family environment on a team where everyone's accepted, everyone's part of the brotherhood. And so right from the start, the guys were amazing and just so kind and welcoming. I definitely got some jokes here and there of, oh, the newspaper guy, oh, what's he doing here? But for the most part, the guys were awesome and so kind and welcoming.
Did you get to play?
Well, that's the funny thing. So I went through practice that spring, and I ended up getting hurt pretty seriously. I dislocated my shoulder and had to get major reconstructive surgery, and the doctor said I was going to be out for 9 months. And for some reason, just obviously looking back, it was God's touch on my life. But I just devoted myself to rehab and just to see if I could get back faster than what the doctor said, being 9 months. And just miraculous divine healing. I got back in 4 months, so less than half the time the doctor said. And there I was back on the football field for the whole fall. And it was funny because during that time, there was a lot of media attention around my story with just being how unique it was. And being a journalist, a newspaper reporter, all the other newspaper reporters kind of saw themselves in me. So they were loving writing the stories about me. And it was just really funny. And through that, a bunch of students started a campaign, Get Ben In. They wanted to see just the lowly, normal, everyday student get in a game because I represented them in a sense, and I was the average student. And so it was really cool because my story became bigger than me, and it was really special to be a part of. And there were so many students involved in this campaign, Get Ben In. They made T-shirts, they made posters, they were chanting in the student section on game days, Get Ben In. It was so fun and really funny too because here I was the last guy on the bench, and I'm getting my name called. So we make it to the last game of the year. We're playing Notre Dame at home in the Coliseum, 92,000 people at the stadium there. Primetime game on national TV, and we're up 20 points with a couple minutes left in the game. And student section is chanting, Get Ben In, and there the coaches say, Benny, you're in. So I made it in for that one play in that game, and it was an incredible kind of crowning achievement for that 1 year of the football stuff. And it was so fun just to see how many people were involved in that. It was an amazing experience.
Wow, Ben, that's amazing. Let's go back to when you were sports editor, because you talked about during that time in college, you couldn't fail. You had a perfectionism driving you. In fact, you wrote this, and I thought it was so great. I got to find that quote, while perfectionism at its best motivates you to reach your goals, at its worst, it destroys your self-esteem when you fall short. Where did that drive come from? And how did God intervene to kind of interrupt that? Because it's not a sustainable way to live.
Not at all. It was probably a product of my childhood. I dealt with issues with my mom. She had a lot of struggles that just kind of wreaked havoc a little bit on our family life. And it was really hard, but just kind of survival instinct kicked in. And I just figured I had to figure out my own way in a sense, and had to really control every aspect of my life to make it perfect if I could, because I needed to do it if I was going to survive. And so that perfectionism probably birthed from there. And as I went through high school, and I just gained this perfectionist attitude, I wanted to be perfect in all my classes. I wanted to be perfect in all my extracurriculars. And it really excites you, because when you are perfect, you kind of fulfill that desire, that burning desire inside of you. But when you fail, it crushes you. And it leaves you lost, and it leaves you just wondering if you're on the wrong path or whatnot. And I think, honestly, God plants that desire inside of all of us, because he's planting that desire that we're reaching out to him, the perfect one. And we're not going to find it on earth. We're definitely not going to find it through our own works and our own actions. And I had to learn that the hard way, because I was trying a lot of things and I was failing at them. And when I was sports editor, I was so perfectionistic that when I made one mistake that whole semester. I missed a period in the caption, and it crushed me. I was destroyed for days. And it's like, come on, really? I'm looking back and I'm like, what was I thinking? But I needed to go through those rock bottom moments, and I needed to really realize how destructive that perfectionism was.
Yeah, you even said at that point you started to kind of let go of relationships and activities that were really good for your soul. And that's, I think, what happens. It's not a static force in us. If we're driven by perfection, to prove something, to try to, dig ourselves out of a hole, or to keep ourselves out of a hole, whatever, again, not sustainable. And I don't think it's not fruitful really either. You might get certain achievements in front of you, but when as you talk about live from the perfection that we have in Christ, living in response to him and what his perfection, what he's already done, you can go so much farther in your life, can't you?
Oh, it's amazing because you're not trying to work your way to perfection, but you're living out of the perfection that he's already obtained and given to us freely as a gift. And so it's just receiving his gift of perfection, his gift of just love, and working and operating and living out of that love is far greater than any perfect works we could try to achieve, which we're going to end up failing at in some way.
Mm-hmm. When you look at your timeline of your life, and there's so much more to a story that we're going to get to here in a moment, but what would you say, which low points really made you the man that you are today? You know what I mean? Those hard places that you look back and go, I don't want to go through those again, but I actually wouldn't trade them for anything.
Wow, that's a great question. And I think for everyone watching right now and listening in, is everyone can immediately picture those moments. There's a handful of moments in all of our lives that we look back and it's, man, I don't want to ever feel that ever again. But I'm kind of grateful I did, because it develops that character. It deepens who you are. I think the challenges of being on that football team right in the beginning, where I was faced with something that I had never experienced before, and the physical pain of an injury, and then the mental pain of trying to figure out a playbook that you'd never touched before, and then the emotional heartache of pouring your heart and soul into trying to make this team and be a part of the team, but seeing you come up short over and over again, it was hard. And then on top of that, just trying to find my purpose on that team and trying to figure out why I was there, and really struggling with seeing the fruit of that. I look back on those times as really life-shaping moments for me. And that was just 1 year of my life. I mean, I could look back. We talk about that 10-year-old Pee Wee football experience where I was crying every day coming home from football practice, and every game I was just begging my dad to let me quit. But I'm so glad I went through it, because it developed this character inside of me that I'm not going to quit when something's hard now. And it's just beautiful, beautiful messages and beautiful lessons.
Coach Pete Carroll writes the foreword in your book, and he just honors you so well. And he talks about, nobody really has impacted his career. You've impacted his life hugely. And Ben, when I think about you as a child crying, Dad, let me out of this because you're getting smashed. You're a small guy, but your dad had some conviction to say, no, you're not going to quit. And then you feel the nudge. And this is what's amazing to me is God is leading us even when we're unaware. You know what I mean? He was nudging you to do this crazy thing, I believe, to try out for a team so you can write an article, when he's up there kind of laughing, going, go ahead, Ben. I got another plan over here, but all right. But I think what Pete Carroll said about you and how you have been a right-hand man to him, it impacted his life, impacted his character and his perspective on the game. You had to go through a lot of hard stuff. I mean, God saw the end result. And my point is, you had to go through a lot of hard stuff to get where God wanted you to go. And I think sometimes, Ben, especially in an entitled culture, in Americanized Christianity, we think if it's hard, it can't be God's will. If I have to sacrifice this much, I must have made a mistake. If you allowed me to make the team, but I'm not playing, I must have heard wrong. And I want you to speak to that, if you would, because you had to die to yourself over and over again, but then you had to rise up in David kind of courage to face Goliath. I mean, none of that was easy, but it was what God used to get you to the point that you are today, where you really are an influencer. So speak to that. That's a big, long-winded question, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, definitely. And I appreciate your words there. It blesses me a lot. And I don't even know what to say there, because it's purely just the Holy Spirit and God just being so present and so real in my life. Because in those hard moments, you can bet $1 million that I was there being entitled to. I was not perfect in those moments at all. And there were many of those low moments where I was like, God, let me out of this, change my circumstances. But just as long as we continue to be faithful and continue to just follow his nudges on our life, knowing that he's guiding us, that he's got his hand on our back, that he's gone before us, that he's at our side, and that he'll always be with us, I think the circumstances matter less and less. Amen. When we're living that way. And the circumstances he's always going to take us glory to glory, and he's going to take us from strength to strength. And when we're going through those hard times, that just means he's leading us through a desert season to bring us to this mountaintop. And then he's going to lead us to another desert season. I've been so fortunate to have a lot of amazing experiences over all these years. But as you've mentioned, it hasn't come easy, and there have been a lot of low moments. There's been a lot of hard times. And that doesn't mean that it's bad. Hard times does not mean bad times. Hard times mean maybe it's just a moment and an opportunity to press in closer to God. And that's what it's been like for me, is in those hard times, I'm really able to just lean into the Father's love more and more. Mm-hmm. And I'm so grateful for it looking back. In those moments, it's hard, and you really wish for escape in those moments. But looking back, I wouldn't trade it for anything.
That's so amazing. So what would you say to the person watching today, Ben, that is sitting here going, okay, I thought I heard you, I followed you, and here I am in this barren wilderness, or I'm in this storm. You led me right into a storm, God. Did I hear you wrong? What should they tell themselves? If they really were waiting on God, they heard from him. And Jesus did that. He led his disciples right into a storm. There's times you're in the center of God's will and you're in a storm. But what word of encouragement, or what what could they say to themselves to keep going?
Yeah, I think for me, it's really easy to lose hope and to lose perspective when you're in the moment. But what I like to think about is looking back on my life. And when you have that hindsight perspective, it just changes things. You see God's hand on your life, and you see why he had you where he had you when you have that hindsight perspective. And so what I try to tell myself is, I don't get what's going on right now, but I trust and I know that God is good. And so a year from now or 5 years from now, I'm going to be able to look back on this moment and most likely see some clarity, and it probably won't be 100% clarity, but you'll at least be able to see the hand of God in some form or fashion when you look back. Mm-hmm. It's just so hard when we're in the moment, though, and when we're dealing with that storm and we're blinded by the wind or the rain or whatever it may be, to have that perspective, but just to trust and to know that God is good. He's always good, and he's always leading.
So good. Talking to Ben Malcomson today, and he's assistant to Coach Pete Carroll of the Seattle Seahawks. Ben's written an amazing book titled Walk On: From Pee Wee Dropout to the NFL Sidelines, My Unlikely Story of Football, Purpose, and Following an Amazing God. We have 5 copies of this great book, and I love this book. Hop on my website after the broadcast. I don't want you doing it now because I want you to pay attention to what Ben has to say, but go to susielarson.com after the broadcast and go to the contact page. There's a menu up in the corner. You'll find a little drop down and reference this interview with Ben. Tell us what stood out to you, what blessed your heart, which part of his story that struck you. And don't forget your mailing address, and we'll get a handful of copies to you. Here again, if you just hopped on, Ben is this guy who had terrible experience as a 5th grader. He was a small guy playing football. He wanted to quit because he was getting smashed into all the time. He vowed he would never play again. He's an amazing writer. He's a sports editor for his college, for a college where the football team happened to be the best in the nation. He decides to do a walk-on tryout as an undercover reporter, not intending at all to make it because he hadn't played in 10 years. Anyway, so he ends up making the team. And if you just hopped on when our live broadcast is over, you got to go back and hear the whole story. But I love this, Ben. You're right. No matter what has happened, your past has no bearing on God's calling for you. Your pedigree doesn't constrain you. Your previous decisions don't define you, and your limitations don't hold you back. Will you leave your past behind and set aside your supposed shortcomings to move forward into the magnificent future God has for you? And I feel like someone needed to hear that tonight. And I'd love for you just to give us context of those moments for you before you knew this. So here you are, again, you make a football team, which you're shocked about, but you're still one of the smaller guys. And some of these guys are giant and twice your size, and they're all in it, I mean, there's several twists and turns in your story where you could have become self-aware, and maybe at moments you did. I mean, how did God strengthen you in those moments? And how did you realize there's a bigger story here than what I'm seeing?
Yeah, almost from the very moment I made the team, I had this deep sense in my heart, my soul, that God had me there for a purpose. And so being a zealous 21-year-old following after Jesus, I couldn't wait to find out what this purpose was. And I was like, okay, God, let's go. I need to find out right now, And so I was pressing into that, and I figured, well, let's start a Bible study for the team. Let's get this thing going. And if God's called me to this team, maybe it's a Bible study. And so I told all my teammates about this Bible study and couldn't wait to figure out, okay, this is my purpose here. I couldn't wait to see this Bible study kind of blow up and get really big and have a huge impact on my teammates. the time came for our first Bible study, and I'm sitting in the room. I had a lesson ready, and I had told all my teammates, and no one showed up. And so, I mean, you can imagine my discouragement and just kind of questioning. I was doubting and wondering, God, I thought I was here for a reason. I thought I was here for a purpose, and I guess I missed it. And so I kind of had to rally and battle through that discouragement. And I got another idea a little bit later that I need to start a prayer group for the team. And so I told all my teammates, I made flyers, and I got a room ready for our first prayer meeting. And we were going to meet the Friday before a Saturday game. And I was fired up. I mean, this was the reason I was on this team, was to have a purpose for the kingdom. And I couldn't wait to see this. And time comes for our first prayer meeting. And again, no one shows up. I'm the only one there. There's 100 guys on the team. I was thinking, okay, at least a handful of guys will show up, but no one did. And I was obviously twice as discouraged and really questioning, doubting my purpose in being on that team. And then I had read in Matthew 5, it says, let your light shine before men. And it hits me like a ton of bricks that lights just shine where they're at. God just calls us to be a light. And so I just needed to be a light. I didn't need to go create events or do things. I needed to be, first and foremost. I needed to be a light. And so I just tried to focus my efforts on being a great teammate, a great friend to the guys around me. And that's the way God will have an impact through me. I was so convinced of that. But after weeks and weeks and months of trying to be a light and trying to just be a great teammate and great friend and try to have good conversations with the guys, nothing was happening. I was seeing zero fruit. I was seeing no results at all. And I know that you can relate with that. I know our viewers can relate with that you feel like God's called you to something and you feel like you've figured it out, but you're not seeing any results. You're seeing zero fruit. And it's hard. It's really heartbreaking and it's really discouraging. And how do you battle through that? And I was close to giving up at that point. I was close to just saying, maybe I missed my purpose on this team and maybe I totally missed it. I was reading in Isaiah 55 and it says, if his word goes out, it does not return empty. And it hit me in that moment, kind of like that moment where I was reading in Matthew 5, let your light shine before men. It hit me right there that if his word goes out, if I put his literal word out there, if I put a Bible out there, it won't come back empty. And God is always faithful to his promises. I knew that deep in my core. And so he's going to be faithful to this promise. And so I got 100 Bibles delivered and I placed one in every guy's locker, every teammate. And I couldn't wait to see the fruit of this. I couldn't wait to see what God had for me there. And because, I mean, I knew he called me to that team for a purpose and I tried all these things that had failed. And so this was it. And this was really the last week of the season. This was my last chance to really find my purpose on this team. And I couldn't wait to see what he had for me there. And so I showed up to the locker room that morning and I was fully expecting just Hallelujah chorus to be sung and a gold light to be emanating from the locker room. I mean, I was so excited because I had found my purpose. I had seen God bring me through the ups and the downs, but this was the reason I was on this team. And I walk into the locker room and there's Bibles just shredded, torn up, thrown all over the floor. You could barely even see the carpet. I was so crushed. I was leveled by this. It was so heartbreaking because I'd poured my heart and soul into trying to find this purpose that I knew that he had me on that team for. And I had failed once again. I had tried the Bible study, that failed. I tried the prayer group, that failed. I tried to be a light, that failed. And here I tried to put his word out there because I knew it was not going to return empty. And it sure looked to me like it was returning empty. And not just empty, but it was returning with opposition. I mean, the Bible's just shredded, ripped up. I was crushed. So we go through the rest of that week and we go to the Rose Bowl, which was one of the coolest games in college football, but I still felt this hole in my heart. I felt like I'd missed my calling. I'd missed my purpose in being on that team. And it was hard. It was a hard experience and I was just trying to make the most of it, but I was hurting. It was a low point for sure. And so it was really hard, really, really hard to go through all those failures. But I find out years and years later that God was at work and that he was faithful all along.
And you found out, I believe, if I remember right, that a player actually had taken his word to heart, right? When you through one of the Bibles?
Yeah, so it's an amazing story that will leave you in awe of God and his goodness and his faithfulness. A couple days after that Rose Bowl game, I'm at home and I get a phone call saying that Mario, one of my teammates, had tragically passed away in the middle of the night. And here he was, 21 years old. He was one of my closest friends on the team, and he had mysteriously died in the middle of the night, just a couple days after the game. And I was absolutely grief-stricken. I was crushed because he was one of my friends. I mean, to deal with death at that age, at 21 years old, is you don't know what to do. You don't know how to process it. And we go to his funeral a few days later, and as a bunch of our offensive linemen are carrying his casket down the center aisle, on top of his casket was the Bible that I had placed in his locker. Mm-hmm. And I had no idea what it meant. Really, at the time, it was just, for me, God's personal touch, just to give me comfort. And it was like God had seen me. And it was God's just incredible hand of comfort in that time. Mm-hmm. And I was so moved by that because it was God was so real to me in that moment, that even though all those things I had tried to find my purpose and they had failed, and on top of that, now a teammate was dead, God had seen me and God had been with me through that whole time. And it felt like God had personally put that Bible on top of Mario's casket that day. Mm. And so it helped me really process that and really get through that time. And I'll never forget that picture. I mean, just seeing that Bible on top of that casket. And I ended up working for Coach Carroll there at USC for the next 3 years, and just an incredible experience. And that's how I really got to know him and develop a great relationship with him, to the point where when he took the job with the Seahawks in 2010, he asked me to go up with him. And I went up, took the job with him in Seattle, and not knowing anyone in Seattle, I was just desperate to make friends and just meet anyone. And I come across this one guy named Char, and he starts telling me about this group called Young Life. And Young Life is a high school mentorship program it's pretty big in the Northwest and areas of the country also. And I show up at this Young Life leader meeting, kind of informational meeting, and I'm just eager to learn about this, just to fill my time outside of work. And a former teammate of mine walks in, and here we are in this small little suburb outside Seattle, and I'm confused. I'm like, what is this guy doing here? His name is Taylor. He was our punter on the team, and I'm just blown away that we're reconvening, just a reunion here 4 years after the last time I'd seen him at Mario's funeral. And we're at a small little suburban town Young Life meeting. It's crazy. And so we remove ourselves from the meeting. We're catching up on life and figuring out, like, what is he doing up here? What am I doing up here? And he starts telling me that his life had totally turned around in the last few years. And I was like, well, what happened? He says, do you remember the last week we were on the team together? There were Bibles in all of our lockers. And I mean, I had honestly forgotten about that experience. I'd forgotten about those Bibles. It represented a lot of pain for me, a lot of discouragement. And honestly, it represented the death of a teammate, a friend of mine. So I kind of had shoved all that stuff under the rug. I hadn't really thought about that in years. And so when he said that, I was jolted, and I was like, oh no, what? I just played dumb. I was like, yeah, I kind of remember those Bibles. I don't know. I guess I kind of remember them. He starts telling me that he grew up in a Christian home, and when he went to college, he decided that he was done with religion. He was done with Christianity, and he decided to live his own life when he was in college. And there he was that morning. He sees a Bible in his locker, and he was confused. Like, who's trying to shove religion down my throat? This is not what I want right now. And he threw his Bible in the back of his locker, and hoping never to really see it again. He's going out to the practice field that day, and he thought he was the last one to leave the locker room, and he's pushing the door to go out to the field. Here's a voice in the back corner of the locker room going, what is this? And he's confused because he thought he was the last one to leave the locker room, and he turns around, and there's Mario, our kicker, sitting in his locker, thumbing through the Bible, going, what is this? And so Taylor, for some reason, sets his pads and his helmet down, turns around and walks back and sits down in the locker next to Mario's. And so Taylor and Mario, they were best friends. They were the punter and the kicker. They spent tons of time together. But for some reason, Taylor was like, Mario, have you never seen a Bible before? And Mario's like, no, what am I supposed to do with this? And so Taylor sits down there for 45 minutes, takes him through the Bible. He says, every word written in red are the words of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, Savior of the world, the one who died to take on your sins, to make you right with God. He's sharing the gospel with Mario. And for 45 minutes. And keep in mind, Taylor hasn't been to church. He hasn't been walking with God for 4 years or so, his whole college experience. But all those seeds that were planted in his heart as a kid by his parents, by the people at his church and his Sunday school, all these people that were planting those seeds in his life as a young boy, as a young man, all the way until he went to college. All those seeds come out bearing fruit in his life 4 years after the fact. And he wasn't even walking with God at the point, but God just took over. The Holy Spirit started speaking through him. And Taylor said for the rest of that week, every spare moment Mario had, he's reading the Bible. Can't get enough of it. He's reading every bus ride, every spare minute that he had between meetings, between practices, whatever it was, Mario couldn't get enough of the Bible. And a few days later, Taylor said that Mario approached him and had just a profound experience. He had started to experience God in a real way. And Mario gave his life to Jesus just in the days before our last game of the year because of those Bibles that were in his locker. And then just a few days after the game, Taylor gets the same call I did. Said, "Did you hear about Mario? He passed away." And in that moment, everything came into crystal clear focus for Taylor. Obviously, he was stricken with grief that one of his best friends had passed away, but he was also overcome with the goodness and the realness of God, that God was so alive and so at work in Mario's life in those days before he was passing away. And God had used Taylor in a real profound way. And so Taylor, on the spot, in the moment that he finds out that Mario had passed away, recommits his life to Christ and gives his life back over to Jesus. And he's telling me this story 4 years later, and I'm on the verge of tears. I'm covered in goosebumps. And Taylor said, "Isn't that the craziest story?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's even crazier because I was the one that put the Bibles in the lockers, and I thought it was a total failure." And we gave each other a big hug, and it's just amazing. I mean, that's the way our God works, and it's truly only our God can do something like that. It's far greater than we could ever even dream of. All the things that went into that, and to never see the fruit for 4 years, and then all of a sudden to see it in incredible fashion. That's our God. It's amazing.
I'm undone by the story. I'm just speechless. And I'm getting an echo in my head. I'm sorry, but oh man, that when I look at it, from the father's perspective, you as a young player who dared to step in over your head to try out for this team, and I know you were thinking you were doing it for an article, but God led you, and you still were a young man of faith, and you were David facing down Goliath, and you stepped in, and you have a heart for the team. So you try to set up a Bible study, try to set up a prayer meeting, you try to be a light, and then you get 100 Bibles. What college student would do that? And you consider these epic failures. And I'm trying to picture the father looking at you going, "I'm so proud of this son of mine." I mean, you're thinking it's an epic fail. And how often as Christians, what we interpret as failure is a massive win in heaven just because you're humble and obedient enough to do something to represent the Father's heart, because outcomes are always in his hands. We know that. But I marvel at your persistence to love these teammates, and then his goodness, God's goodness, to come back around to say, not only was this not an epic fail, this was a miracle in the making, and you were part of it. I mean, what did that do for your faith to hear that update?
Oh, I mean, it's changed my life forever because it's truly shown that God is so faithful to his promise, that he never fails, that he's so passionately in love with us that he'll pursue us to the ends of the earth. And that he was pursuing Mario to the ends of the earth to the point that he would place a newspaper reporter in a walk-on tryout and then go through that tryout, make the team, overcome an injury, all these things just so that God could show how much he loved Mario. And God is just so passionately in love with us that he will tax everything in heaven and earth in order to reach the one. The 99 are there, but he'll go after the one. And that is our God. And I'm the one that needs to hear this story more than anyone over and over again. I mean, I need to be hearing this story because I still struggle with this. I think like we all do. We all struggle with, oh man, maybe I'm not having an impact. Maybe I'm not reaching the people I want to reach. Maybe I'm not loving people well enough, or it just feels like I'm not having much influence anywhere. But just to know that even when we can't see the fruit, even when we can't see what God is doing, that he is there and that he is so real and that he is always at work, whether we can see it or not.
And you think of, is it Taylor? That was his name, the other player?
Yeah.
I imagine his parents being so brokenhearted that they raised him in the faith and he wandered away. And that God would orchestrate his comeback, his recommitment through a need. I mean, this is a way for parents of prodigals to pray. Put people in their path that need what they have, what's been deposited in them, because it like activates their root system. I mean, that to me is another miraculous part of that story.
Oh, it's amazing. That gives me goosebumps what you just said there.
Yeah.
Just to activate that root system.
Yeah.
It's so real in the Bible. It's like train a child in the way he should go, and he'll never depart from it. I mean, we're all in our own ways prodigals. We're all prodigal sons and daughters. We all turn in our own ways, and some seasons are longer than others. But to know and to trust that as we continue to pour into the people around us, especially our younger people around us, that those seeds will activate. Those seeds will bear fruit down the road, and it's going to come in unlikely ways, like this story with Taylor. I mean, who would have ever imagined that here he is 4 years after last going to church, and God just starts speaking through him to save someone's life.
Amazing. How did the rest of your teammates respond to you during that time, knowing you're a young man of faith? Did they mock you? Did they just dismiss you? Were they kind to you? And what kind of relationship did you have with them?
Yeah, it was all over the lot. I mean, there were some guys that were like, "Oh man, thanks for doing all this. This is really great." Some guys were just kind of apathetic towards it. Some guys were like, "What are you doing? Like this? That's the chaplain's job, or something like that." And it was all over the place. And I'm just fortunate to have some semblance of encouragement and just to have God's word to lean on in that time. I couldn't have made it through without that.
When Coach Pete Carroll made head coach position Seattle Seahawks, before he asked you, did you have any kind of sense that he would ask you? I mean, were you sort of hoping that he would call you to go with him, or what was going through your mind at that time?
Yeah, I was definitely hoping. I loved working for him those years down at USC, and I was hoping that it would work out. But I also loved Los Angeles. I loved being in California, and I had an incredible church community there, incredible friends there, and I also didn't want to leave that area because I had grown up in a sense as a man of God there, and it was hard for me to leave. And so it felt like it was going to be a win-win. But if I didn't go up, I would have never found out this story. I would have never found out what God had been up to all along, and who knows what could happen from there. I mean, my life would have been so different without finding out just the realness and the truth of God's word and how real he is in my life.
Yeah. I just can't help but go back to that, young boy who said, "I'm never playing football again." And God chuckling up in heaven going, "Actually, you're not only going to play, you're going to be on the sidelines." But here you are in the NFL on the sidelines with one of the most respected coaches in the NFL. And I mean, what's it like for you as a man of faith in that role on such a big stage?
Well, it's really special because you have a lot of opportunities to reach a lot of people, and I'm so fortunate just to be around Coach Carroll all the time. I think first and foremost, my calling at work is to serve him, and the fact that I get paid to be a servant, I think, is a really special opportunity and something that I cherish because God calls us all to be servants, and I get to do that as my job. And I'm just so fortunate to be able to serve him in all the ways that I can. And then the relationships that we're able to form because of where we're at, and just the magnitude of being in the NFL and working for a team in Seattle, where, I mean, everyone in Seattle is a 12. Everyone in Seattle loves the Seahawks, and we travel to all our road stadiums and all that. And there's Seahawks fans everywhere we go, and it's just really cool, the doors that are open and the relationships that are able to be formed because of the platform that we're on, and it's really, really special.
Yeah. Some people get a sense of, I'm supposed to be, at least I have a sense of the lane. I'm going to be an author or speaker. I'm going to be, open a battered women's shelter. Some have a sense of the end goal. And others are like you, where there are twists and turns. And you didn't say, "I'm going to stand on the NFL sidelines and assist this major NFL coach." I mean, what advice do you have for the person who's feeling like, "I don't have a vision"? They still have a call, right? Even though if they don't have a sense of, I mean, man makes his plans, the Bible says, and the Lord determines his steps. So even those who, tell God what they're going to do, he laughs about that too at times, I think, you know what I mean? But there are people who have a sense of the call, but just because you don't have that doesn't mean you're not called. So speak to that if you would.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think that's the beautiful thing in it, and I love that you mentioned that verse about how the Lord determines His steps. And I think that that's the reason we chose this title, "Walk On," because it's got a double meaning. It's the walk on a football team, the end of the bench guy that doesn't have a scholarship. He's a walk on football player. But then it's also an encouragement for us all to walk on in our faith, to take those steps. And really, all God's calling us to is just take the next step. You don't need to know your 10-year plan or your 5-year plan, or even you don't even need to know what's going to happen next month, but just to be faithful and to be obedient for that next step. And we can all do that. We can all listen to those nudges. We can all just listen to what God has for us tonight, tomorrow morning when we wake up, whatever it may be. But just to be faithful and obedient, to take those next steps just one at a time, and He'll lead us to where He wants us to go.
Boy, so good. I love this one. You said looking at life with an expectant perspective through a lens of excitement and anticipation of God's goodness can fill every day with wonder. I think so often when you go through hard times and you're in the storm, we develop a defensive posture. We're kind of bracing for impact, waiting for the next shoe to drop. And as someone who's walked through some pretty hard stuff, I've found myself in that place where you're bracing for impact, but it's no way to live. It's not good for your physiology. It's not good for your faith. So I want to read this again. Looking at life with an expectant perspective through a lens of excitement and anticipation of God's goodness can fill every day with wonder. I would love if you don't mind speaking to that person who feels like they've been beat up so much by life that the light's gone out of their eyes. How do they renew and find hope again and trust that they're not one of the have-nots? I mean, God's no respecter of persons. He's a respecter of faith. So
Yeah.
how can they strengthen themselves in the Lord, so to speak?
Yeah, well, our God is a God of abundance, and there's not enough pieces in the pie to exhaust His riches.
Mm-hmm.
And He doesn't just have just some small amount. I mean, He's just endless supply of goodness, and He wants to bless His children. And so I think it's living from that fact is He calls us to be children. He calls us to be sons and daughters, and just to sit there and just receive His love and just receive what He has for us. We don't have to earn it. We can't earn it. We don't have to work for it because we can't. And so it's just being a son and a daughter of God and just to receive. And I think like children are so good at, they're so good at having that sense of wonder, just being in awe of the trees, or being in awe of something on TV, or being in awe of a sunset. That adults, we kind of lose our sense of wonder sometimes because we think we already know what's going on around us, or we think, okay, that's old news, or I need to figure out my next paycheck. The worries of the world kind of constrain us, but having that sense of wonder like a child, I think that really recaptures that sense of expectancy that God is alive, that He's at work, then He has an incredible purpose for each one of us. And it's not limited to certain people. Like you mentioned, it's not certain people have a purpose and certain people don't, but God has an amazing purpose for each and every one of us, because there's people around all of us that He wants to rescue, that He wants to save, that He wants to love, and really bring them to heaven where they belong. And so God desires to do amazing work through each one of us.
So good. Couple more questions for you before we get ready to wrap. This has been such a fantastic conversation. You mentioned earlier a verse that I'd actually just told a young lady today, talked about going from strength to strength, glory to glory, shining ever brighter to the full light of day, that God intends for us to grow and shine brighter. But the enemy hates that. And there's always opposition. I think sometimes people think you get to a certain place in your faith walk. I don't know how we'd ever think this, but that, we get above the opposition, but we don't. And I would love for you, as much as you're comfortable or able, how does opposition come at you? I mean, and I think everybody can land in the ditch for one reason or the other. Sometimes it's those will go to a place of self-contempt or fear or anxiety or just busyness. But what kind of gets, how do you land in the ditch, so to speak, and what do you do to get back out again? Or maybe you don't, but
Oh no, I think we all do for sure. And I think the biggest thing for me that I face is just discouragement. And it's funny because the enemy will attack us in our strongest points, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And with this book and with this story, it's an incredible example of God's faithfulness and his goodness, and the fact that He does have purpose for us. And yet I find myself all the time questioning, do I have a purpose? God, do you have me here for a reason? Am I among the people I'm with? Am I at work for a purpose? Am I volunteering with the right things, all these factors in life. And I sit there and I doubt and I'm discouraged. I'm just thinking I'm not having any impact where I am. And I think the time is a waste. And that's why I'm the one that needs to read this book more than anyone. I'm the one that needs to hear this story over and over and over again, because this proves to me that God does have a purpose, that he is at work. And I think we need to hear testimonies. We need to hear stories like this to constantly encourage ourselves. And for me, it's that discouragement of wondering if I do have a purpose, if I do have impact. And I'm so grateful that God has given me this story, and I'm the one that needs to preach it to myself more and more each day.
Mm-hmm. Boy, that's so good, Ben. Do you have dreams? I mean, are you someone who gets a dream ahead of you, or because of the twists and turns, are you someone who just continues to take the next step?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something I wish I dreamed more, honestly. But I think because of this story and because of this last 10, 12 years I've lived, God has really helped me just live moment by moment, day by day. And so it's hard for me to even look into tomorrow, really. And so I'm just maxing out every day. And like this hour that I get with you, I'm just pouring everything I have into this. I don't even know what's happening after this, And so I'm so moment by moment, which sometimes is amazing and such a gift. And sometimes it's like, man, I wish I could have planned ahead a little bit, or I wish I could have dreamed a little bit more. But for the most part, I'm so grateful God has turned this, developed this inside of me. And it's really helped me continue to take those steps one by one, just little by little at a time.
Okay, my last question. What do you know about God now that you didn't know back then?
Oh man, do we have another hour?
Yeah.
Oh man, I think the first thing that comes to my mind is just the story that he's writing through all of our lives, through your life, Susie, through every person that's watching this right now, through my life, that he's writing an incredible story in all of our lives. And we don't get to see it in the moment. I mean, if you just flip open a book to chapter 8, you don't really get the full picture. And that's kind of where we're at right now in all of our lives. We're kind of just in the middle of the book. We don't know where the book's going. We don't know where this story's headed. And the verse that's really stuck with me and that's encouraged me through this process is Habakkuk 1:5. And it's a minor prophet in the back of the Old Testament. Is, look at the nations and watch and be utterly amazed, for I'm doing something in your days that you would not believe, even if you were told. And so just to know that God is writing a story in all of our lives that we wouldn't believe even if he told us right now. And that's just, it's hard to even process. It's hard to even think about because it's so overwhelming, because his goodness is just so jaw-dropping, honestly. If I would have been told 12 years ago, all these things are going to happen, I wouldn't have believed it. It's too far beyond my comprehension. And to know that God desires to do that in each and every one of us, not just looking back, but going forward too.
Yeah. What's going to be amazing, and the Bible talks about set your sights on the realities of heaven. I want to be standing nearby when you get your great reward, because I think you're going to be blown away. Talk about a bigger story about the times that you were bearing fruit that you didn't even know about, because of your heart. You're like a David. You have a heart, for the Lord. And I just think, I've been studying heaven. My little sister's husband died of pancreatic cancer a couple years ago. And I'm telling you, that loss, as much as it was difficult to lose my dad years before, that was painful. For some reason, this, because he was too young to die, hit us so deeply and profoundly. But I'd been a Christian a long time, but this losing Donnie made me think more about eternity than ever before. I started to read books on heaven, interview, the Randy Elkhorns and John Burks on heaven. And what is ahead for us? What we suffer now is nothing compared to the glory that will be revealed to us later. And the aspects of the story of Taylor, and is it Mario, or what was his name again?
Yeah, Mario.
Oh my goodness. I feel like the implications of that story you got a little glimpse, but I think the fruit and the implications of that story are so much more far reaching than you can imagine. And I think we have to keep that eternal perspective so we can keep marching. That he does open the sky a little bit and let us see bits, but those are just bits of the glory that will be revealed to us later. I mean, that keeps me marching because he's far greater than we can imagine,
Amen. Amen.
Yeah. Wow. Well, Ben, this has been fantastic. And I just can't thank you enough for your time. And I'm going to be praying for you. I'm a major, Vikings fan, and I like the Broncos, and I like the Packs, which I shouldn't say that out loud as an upper Midwest gal. But I'm going to be watching and be praying for you. It's just such an honor to call you brother and to meet you tonight. Thank you for the time.
Thank you so much, Susie. God bless you, and God bless everyone listening in, watching right now.
So great. And I'll tell you, we get many, many, many views after the fact where the video starts to be shared. So you be praying for that, because in the days to come, many will watch this. But talking to Ben Malcomson again, he's assistant to head coach Pete Carroll of Seattle Seahawks. Ben's book is titled Walk On: From Pee Wee Dropout to the NFL Sidelines, My Unlikely Story of Football Purpose and Following an Amazing God. It's an amazing book. Go to my website now, susielarson.com. Again, up in the left corner, there's a drop-down menu. Find the contact page. Tell me what part of Ben's story grabbed your heart, something he said that ministered to you. That just helps me to know what's resonating with you. But also, I want you to remember your mailing address. I can't tell you, I get hundreds of emails and only a handful with addresses. So I need that address to mail you a book. So God bless you. Thank you for tuning in tonight. And Ben, again, God's best to you and your dear wife.
Thank you so much, Susie.
Yeah.
God bless you.
God bless you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.